There we go.
Yep, perfect.
It's been a little while since I've done one of these. All right. Welcome everyone to Power BI Data Security. My name is Steve Hughes. I'm Director of Consulting here, and we're going to get kicked off and jump into a lot of material. A little bit about me to start with. Make sure I'm on the right thing here. I've been a paramedic work for over 4 years now. Actually, maybe over 5 years now. Doing about 20 years of work in SQL Server, BI, Azure Solution Space. You can catch me at Data on Wheels, so just so you know kind of where my blog is at, and there's my email address. The funny thing about this presentation, I think we started presenting Power BI data security materials about 3 or 4 years ago. Pretty much I started at Works as Power BI was coming on the scene, and it was pretty much the most often asked question I had. So we dig into, a lot of times when we talk about security concerns with Power BI, it starts out at the very basics. Can you trust the cloud? Can you trust Azure? Owns my data and has access to it. The hybrid scenario, expose my data center, and really who can publish that data to the cloud. And we're going to cover a number of the security concerns today and dig into the feature sets that Power BI brings to bear. It allows you to make sure that you are both compliant and secure. So we're going to start kind of the big picture of compliance and move into some of the detailed application of how Power BI secures your data and what you can do to keep your data secure. It's not always on the tool or on the offering, but sometimes it's in your hands as well. So let's jump right in. So starting out data compliance and security in Power BI. One thing you should be aware of is compliance is a continually changing thing at Microsoft, and it's changing in the right direction. They're typically trying to be more and more compliant across your tool set. I encourage you, as a part of that process, of your process, you should be checking out the Microsoft Trust Center. Microsoft Trust Center is a location for all the information about compliance and what Microsoft is doing in order to support as you go along in your efforts and basically making sure that you have the information you need. So when you get audited or you run a regulated environment, so healthcare or finance, the opportunity to actually go see what might keep your data secure and compliant from an overall platform standpoint. So just kind of get a high level, I always encourage everyone to go check that out. Microsoft is continually making improvements to their compliance and will continue to do so through as they move forward, because that's such a key part of everything we do, is making sure our data is secure. So that's where we're starting compliance. I'm not going to deep dive into compliance. A lot of it's your processes, but you need to understand the platform itself starts out as a compliant platform, and you have the ability to stay in compliance with everything you're doing. The next piece on the platform I really want to I look at, and is a commonly asked question. Let's talk about encryption. Where do we sit with encryption? What does it mean? What's going on? So the first thing to be aware of is that it depends on how you connect with your data. So I'm not going to dive into design today, but we're going to talk through kind of how security plays out and the pieces that are components that are there, including the encryption scenario. So if we look at this diagrams that I have set up, a couple things. Data at rest is the first primary concern. When I have data at rest, what is actually being stored there? How is it being secured? What is being encrypted? So all your data at rest is encrypted. So let's start with that. So at the high level, everything you put into Power BI, when it lands in the underlying Azure storage, it is encrypted. Now that being said, there's a variety of data sources we can run which change kind of the tenor of the conversation. A live connection, which connects to analysis services, either tabular or multidimensional, on-premise, or even in Azure Analysis Services. The key here is that Power BI doesn't store anything except the database name. It doesn't need to. Every request you make is being sent across the wire. Nothing is landing in Azure besides the database name, so there's no actual data being stored. And it is encrypted in flight, which we'll talk about here in a second. But what this means is, from a security standpoint, if you're concerned about your data or you're trying to talk through what does this mean to run Power BI service, this is the type of the encryption that's working. Now, if you run Power BI on premises, you're responsible for more of this. And I just want to be really clear that for the rest of the conversation, I'm going to be talking about the service. If you're running on premises, it's similar to reporting services, how it manages all the connectivity and all that. And I won't be covering the on-premises version in this conversation, because usually the focus is on cloud security when we're having these conversations and how to best secure in the cloud. So going back to what we had, live connection just means the database name is encrypted in an Azure SQL database instance that's used to support your Power BI environment, and that's it. We go into direct query, which is where you actually have the ability to query the databases live, and you're still sending queries over the wire pretty much in a live fashion. The metadata around that has to be stored. So unlike a live connection, which natively speaks DAX and MDX to the Power BI service, direct query has a translation, needs to store the metadata, allows you to build and expand on the models. So you might have calculations and all that kind of stuff. All that metadata is encrypted in Azure Blob storage for the connection that you have. Once again, the data is not being stored. So because data is not being stored, you really have no data at rest issues here with direct query as well. We've used this in cases where compliance, internal compliance rules required certain things with certain data. You're able to leverage things like direct query and live connection to leave the data on premise with only metadata stored in the cloud. The push or stream data, this is one of those, it's an interesting scenario. You'd think a stream data set doesn't store anything, but it does. It actually will store the data in blob storage or Azure SQL database. The reason it does that, it allows for some historical reference and playback. So if you're seeing a stream and you want to look at the history, or you want to look at a chart that has a little bit of history in it, the only way it can do that is actually store that data in blob storage for future reference. Once it lands there, it's encrypted as expected. Like I said, it's in blob storage or SQL database, but that data is encrypted to rest as well. The data is loaded into the model. This is a refresh model, however you want to look at it. But this really is is the simplest model and the one that most people are aware of. In this case, just be aware that everything, metadata and data, are both encrypted in Azure Blob Storage. So the key here is that all your data at rest, if it does go into Azure, or the metadata, all this is encrypted within the environment as a part of your solution. Data in transit, all data is encrypted with HTTPS. So it's typical of most Azure work, that data while it's in flight is encrypted. And when data in use is an interesting scenario, because even with direct query, or especially with direct query, there's some data that gets cached for performance reasons, and that data is very temporary in nature and is currently encrypted in an Azure SQL database as well. So this question had come up a number of times when we're digging into what about caching and why is it cached? It's really around performance, so it may cache some of the data that's being used a lot. So just be aware there is a data cache involved with Power BI, and that also is encrypted in those cases where it's used. The next most common question I got was, well, if we install the gateway, what does that mean? Key thing here is that the way the on-premises data gateway works, there's a lot of words on the screen, so I'll let you all absorb that. Its design is basically the way that you communicate with Power BI. Power BI actually stacks data up on an Azure service bus, or requests up on an Azure service bus. So it said, hey, when the gateway asks, here's what I need. The key here is that at no point in this scenario does Power BI actually reach into your environment. It just drops requests onto a service bus and says, hey, if you have this data, can you please, I want to request it. So this means that you're fully in control of your data center and your ability to actually shut off Power BI from supporting you. So just be aware of that. It's outgoing ports only. There are a number of things around this, but from a security standpoint, the gateway manages the encryption of your data, transmitting it back to the service bus to fulfill the requests and fulfill the needs across all of these, the Power Platform tools, as well as logic apps and analysis services online. So just be aware that that's what the gateway is doing. They're making performance improvements, things like that all the time to the gateway and its ability to take care of mashup data, that kind of things. That's not what we're digging into here. What I want you to, the most important thing to walk away from this conversation around security is a data gateway enables your data center to talk to Power BI, but it doesn't make Power BI able to talk to your data center. So it actually does a lot of the encryption, decryption. The keys are stored here. It's a lot of important things that are happening in that gateway. Some customers occasionally have issues around performance. We typically recommend that you put the gateway on a separate VM. It lets you manage the performance from that perspective if that becomes an issue, since it is managing the encryption of your data prior to issuing it back to Power BI. Going into some of the other things you can set up at the high level, the admin portal and tenant settings. I'm actually going to open this up here in a moment so you can actually see the admin portal. But those of you who don't know, there are a few things that you can change in your portal and tenant settings that actually can expose data, not expose data. It becomes really important to understand this. There are two key levels of administration when it comes to Power BI. There is the Power BI admin, which is the admin that supports Power BI directly from that perspective. However, certain features are only available to the Office 365 admin. We'll talk about those and show you why that's important to know what you need to get into for both of those. So going through this list here really quickly, there's a couple things to be aware of in those settings. There's a number of things about sharing content. Are you allowed to share content with external users? We recommend that be disabled unless you have a use case for it. Publishing to web. We also recommend that this is disabled so that you don't have somebody unintentionally publish your financials, for instance, out onto their blog site as a demo to illustrate to what's going on. You don't want to have that happening. You also have the ability to manage whether you can export data just straight up to Excel, whether you can export to PowerPoint, whether you can even print it. Basically, you need to look at those. Those are not ones we make recommendations on. These are common practice items. But you may have situations where you only want certain groups to have the ability to actually export the content to essentially a printable interface. We all know there's ways around that, but at the end of the day, this is really one of those things that you have to make decisions internally how you control that. These settings are at the tenant level. So if I choose not to let a group export to PowerPoint, if I set it up wrong, I may prevent everyone from exporting to PowerPoint. You need to understand, how that's going to look. The new workspaces. Now we have the ability to turn off workspace creation inside of the Power BI portal. This does not affect the current, the original version of workspaces, which allowed anybody with a pro license to create a workspace and in turn create an Office 365 group. We'll dig into that a little more detail, but now with a new feature set, this is a permission set they're providing to us, which is huge, because now it can be managed for Power BI at the Power BI level, not at the Office 365 group creation level. And there's another new feature that you have the ability to turn on, which is allowing external guest users to edit and manage content. We're going to dig into external users and how they affect what we're doing in our security models. Now for my public service announcement. Share content with external users and publish the web. These features are turned on by default. If you are new to Power BI, last time I've helped create a new tenant, these are still turned on by default. We recommend that you disable these. And what it does is it prevents people from sharing content to folks outside the organization until you're ready to figure out how to do that. So let's just dig in real quick here. What I want to do. Okay, if the admin portal, this is the admin portal here. Let me go ahead and zoom this in a little bit more so everybody can see it. And you can find that on the gear here. So if you have Power BI admin permissions that have been set up for you by your Office 365 admin, you will be able to see admin portal as one of the options you have there. So when you click on admin portal, it's going to open up, and the first thing it's going to default to is your usage metrics that you see here. So when you look at the admin portal, there's a few things in here. I can see all the reports that are created. It's got a few charts and graphs and some items in there. So you can see those usage metrics. You also can access users if you have access to the Office 365 Center. We'll dig into that with as we go into those details a little more, as well as audit logs. We have a whole section a little bit later about audits. Let's see. I'm just watching my notes here. Hopefully everybody's the screen's refreshing here. It looks like it's having some issues. Tenant settings. This is the page that you care about the most when you're early on starting if you have not done the security due diligence. So the first one, get help. That's something about how you want to share with your organization. That's fine. Workspace settings. This one here is one of the new ones we talked about. So basically, if you want to allow anyone that has a pro license to create workspaces, you can enable this enabled for the whole organization by default, because that was basically what you had before. You had the ability, anybody with a pro license could actually create a workspace. This is a section that's the most important for you to handle when it comes to data security. So I'm not digging into the rest of it a lot right now. I just want to make sure that you understand things that you should turn off. I've left everything in defaults, so you can see what the default settings are on mine. And you can see here that share content with external users. I can share dashboards and reports outside the organization. It's currently enabled for my entire organization. I would be able to share with anybody, anywhere. You should disable that one. Publish to web is a similar thing. I can actually publish to a website, and I can go get some codes and do all this great stuff and show some stuff off. And you need to make sure that I'm, have everybody following along and doing what they're supposed to do. They should disable this by default. So if these two features here that we're talking about, I'll be really clear on, if you have not disabled those for your organization, or only have them enabled as you expect to, like maybe marketing has the ability to publish some content to web, that kind of thing, you need to make sure those are turned off. This is typically one of those things when I'm showing this to folks that it's really funny, because they'll actually go and call their admin. Right now is a good time to do that if you haven't done this. Those two, it's really important that you need to make sure they're off. These other ones are the other sharing ways, so like exporting data, exporting reports, printing dashboards and reports, and allowing guest users. I'll come back to that one, but these other ones here are about sharing. You need to make sure those are set how you want them to be. If you want to allow people to export, not export, they're enabled for the entire organization. They're turned on. You can set these up to actually work with specific user groups, or you can do that except for certain security groups that you don't want to have the permission. So you have that ability to set those up there. This allows external guest users to edit and manage content in your organization. I'm going to dig into that a lot more when we go talk about external guest users and what the impact is there. So, but for now, part of the public service announcement is making sure that you have these two turned off, unless you have a specific use case for them, because they're the most important two to turn off in this space. All right. Going back to the slide deck here. So now you know where to disable those features. If you are not an admin and do not have those permissions, go talk to your admin and make sure that you're secure in your environment. This is about data security after all. Talk a little bit about row-level security before we dig into some of the details from things. Row-level security is supported in two ways in Power BI. One is with embedded in Power BI itself. You can actually go into workspaces and members, and you use DAX expressions just like you would do in analysis services, tabular models, to build out security at the Power BI report level or workspace level. The reason this is really important is some of the data sources themselves don't support row-level security or any type of row-level security at all. For instance, like a text file may not, and maybe a part of your source. This allows you to further secure data and access to that data as needed. So just be aware that that is something that you need to consider there, that you can actually do it at the Power BI level. Otherwise, row-level security of live connections is supported. This is very similar to, well, it uses effective username, which is similar to how we used to handle row-level security in SharePoint integration when that was one of those things that we did a lot of. So one thing to be aware of is row-level security is not supported in your new workspaces. And that is a feature that we'll talk about the new workspaces, but it has to do with how members are handled within the new workspace. It's currently not supported. I expect to see that change as they adapt later on. But for right now, if you're running row-level security in the workspace and you're not deploying to apps, then you need to make sure that you understand row-level is actually not supported in that scenario. All right. Digging into the next piece, we're going to talk about some collaborations and data security. So to dig into this, we're going to get some details pretty quick. So here we go. Enjoy the ride. So Power BI apps and app workspaces. Power BI apps and app workspaces support shared development, stage deployment, and apps keep all the content organized together. Now, functionally, that's the things we care about. From a security standpoint, Power BI apps support deploying read-only assets for distribution. And this is really important to understand, is this is beyond the workspace. So if you actually take a workspace and deploy it as an app, you actually can guarantee that read-only is available there. The exception would be is if someone has permissions in the underlying workspace, they can then choose to go to the workspace and edit. But when you're looking at large-scale deployments of Power BI assets, we definitely recommend that you use Power BI apps to deploy and get the read-only. And it works for pro users. If you're in a pro user scenario only, then as you share Power BI apps, anybody with pro license will be able to have read-only access to those apps. If you have premium set up, then premium users that use essentially the free account can have that as well. There are changes coming. They're looking at adding additional roles. Those roles are not available yet, but they are looking at additional roles that will allow us to have more granular control over who can see or consume the content without necessarily being content creators. So workspaces are the next tier down. So if we look at the top level, this is, hey, we can access and read the data. If we go to workspaces, we have this workspaces we have this old versus new workspace concept. So the old workspaces, which were not really that old, but every time you created a workspace, you actually created a matching Office 365 group, which meant, which it could be used good or bad, right? So that group would also have access to things like Teams or Planner or SharePoint. That group is used within the Office 365 world. The only way you could add users in there, you'd add them individually. So you'd actually plug users in one at a time into that group and give them one level of permission or the other. You say, hey, they're either admin or a member. Now, if depending on how you're set up, the members who can edit content, members who cannot edit content were the two options you had there. If you want to implement row-level security at the workspace level, you need to set members up who cannot edit content, which basically limits admins being the only ones that can actually be content editors in that scenario. And that's the only way you get row-level security actually working within the old workspace. In the new workspace, no Office 365 group is created. So now you create a workspace, it creates a workspace as its own Power BI workspace entity. It uses individuals, users. You can actually put security groups in there now or Office groups that you already had. So what's really important about that is that I can now create a workspace and then assign permissions to it. Along that lines, I got 3 sets of permissions I can support. The admin, who the primary focus there between it and the contributor, is an admin has permissions to add people or groups to your workspace. A contributor is exactly what it sounds like. They're able to contribute content to the workspace, and then the reader has the effective read-only access to that workspace. So if you share the workspace as opposed to sharing an app, people with reader permissions will be able to work within that context of that workspace on the application. Both workspaces they're the only place you can create content. So you have to be in a workspace to create content. Admin users they're the ones who set the user in groups with permissions on both cases. And workspaces are listed now in the admin portal in Power BI. So real quickly, let's switch over to here. We can actually go down to this workspaces tab. And now you can actually see all the workspaces that are created. You can see here, now you see workspaces, a new workspace, and group is the old workspace style. So it actually has both of those, and you can turn them, make them active, inactive, those kind of things, and modify the user groups here. But this, at least now, this is a new setting based, which can just come out in the last few months and allows you to actually see the workspaces that are there. All right. So a little bit of I wanted to show a little bit of a different feel. So one of the things to be aware of, at the top on the left here, we actually show the old. So this is the old one here. What's really important on that is that when we create the new one, we only have the option to see the ellipsis that goes down, edit workspace. The workspace lets me do the old style of adding users to the group that exists behind the scenes. Now with the new one on the right side, you can see that I've highlighted the access or workspace access coming from the drop-down list. Both of those will open up an access dialog, which allows you to go ahead and set permissions by group, by the members in the group, and so on. So this, or by even though it says enter email addresses, you can actually put a distribution list in there. You can put a security group in there. It'll know how to handle all those scenarios and allow you to get access to your workspace from that. Significant improvements on the new workspaces, and as much as possible, you should be creating all your workspaces in a new model, as this is something where they're continuing to make improvements to. Power BI Premium read-only users, just so we're clear on this, currently Power BI Premium supports a true read-only version, and this is typically given to what's called free users or has been called free users in the past. You can put unlimited use on there. So looking at Premium, from a security standpoint, it's actually a great way to prevent content creation, so that only contributors are going to be Power BI Pro licensees. This actually really helps from a standpoint. Security is a really big concern. You really should evaluate Premium. This is a pretty high price point, depending on what you're looking at doing and how many people you have it. At the end of the day, it's actually a big security boost to your BI solutions. If it's this is a concern, then as like any type of security, you're going to pay additional security. So this is one of the things to be aware of. If this is something that you need to implement for security reasons, you need to consider the cost as well. Groups. There are 4 groups supported in Office 365. This is really important to those of you who actually 365 admins looking at groups. Office 365 was the original group recommended by Microsoft. Admins didn't like it because it managed individual user time and it had groups to it. That's why we have new workspaces. The new workspaces support all these data types natively, or these groups natively, and it's much easier to manage. The security group, or mail-in security group, both of those are the preferred method for managing, because you manage them from Azure Active Directory as opposed to managing just the Office 365 level. So just wanted to put this up here to where there are a number of types of groups. So we look at Office 365 and show you these 4 types of groups that are available to you. This section is about collaboration. So one of the most common things we see happening when it comes to data security is, what do I do about sharing? And this is really important to understand, because why do I want to share? Well, I'm bound to a workspace or app. And one also scenario, there's validation, there's testing. Hey, I need to have look at my report to make sure it's accurate before I publish it. Sharing is a great way to do that. So it's not like it should be totally discouraged. More importantly, can't be prevented within your organization. So any user within your organization can share the content out to someone else in the organization. So just be aware of that. A lot of people aren't aware of that. The biggest thing you're going to need to do is track sharing in auditing and work through that process. So this is some of the reasons that folks lean on Azure Analysis Services, for instance, as their primary backend, because they can actually limit data exposure through that as well. So if you have highly sensitive data, you're probably looking at a scenario where you need to implement row-level security of some kind, so that when something gets shared out, that you are not exposing data unexpectedly. Sharing outside the organization is one of the my public service announcements at the beginning, and you can turn that capability off from the beginning, so no one can just share outside the organization, which is a pretty good idea. Limiting your share capabilities. You can set up sharing options. So you can say, hey, I only want to allow people to read and reshare, which is a default. Keep in mind, read and reshare is a default, or you're the owner when it comes to sharing. Read and reshare is an interesting concept, because it's kind of like daisy chaining your share options. Oh, I shared it with Sam, but he shared it with Felicia, who shared it with George, who shared, and it goes on and on. So just be aware that that's how it's set up. And like I said, the biggest thing you need to be able to do is audit that information. You can also apply filters and slices to shares. You're like, oh, great. I can share this with someone and it'll be filtered. And just remember that they can go ahead and change the filters, and they can, so it's not really a security option. It just sets the view up that you want to share. It doesn't necessarily limit their capability to change it around. So just be aware of that. It's one of those things that there's a couple items like that within Power BI that sound really great, but at the end of the day, they're not truly an option for turning things off. Guest users. We talked about this. This is one of the both the great things about Power BI and should scare everybody to death all at the same time. So guest users sharing outside my walls. So guest user creation can be limited in 3 places. I can prevent guest users from being created in Power BI tenant settings by turning off the ability to share outside. Office 365 security settings, which is a broader coverage of more than just Power BI. And Azure Active Directory, you can go in there and change it as well. So be aware that that's something that is an admin across the board. You need to understand where you can turn off sharing capabilities. And a lot of it has to do with guest user accounts being created. So there was a feature added about email. You can share your Power BI content with anybody by email. It's done the same way as normal sharing, essentially, but then you can put it to like an @gmail.com account like I have here, or some other organization. Power Apps can be shared the same way. What you need to understand is when you do this and you allow people to do this, they actually are creating guest accounts in Azure Active Directory. This is one of the reasons why you can prevent this at the Azure Active Directory level, and people can come to you and ask and say, hey, I wanted to share this with so-and-so, they're outside organization, but I've already got approval. There's things you can, this at least blocks it from just, happening without your consent. The new workspaces, they have an allow external guest users to edit and manage content. This is not turned on by default. So it is actually turned off by default. Guest users, once it's turned on, can add content to your workspace. So the new workspaces not only allow guest users to read, they can actually add. They can actually create. They can do some other things within the space. Now, it's not completely wide open. They can be an admin in that space. There's a number of things they can do. So like if you have a specific use case where you're doing a B2B scenario and you're trying, you basically make a workspace available and you allow it to be managed by someone else, this is a way you can do that. Keep in mind that, all the rest of the rules apply, licensing, all that stuff you'll need to sort out. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty interesting new feature that also is a data security hole, and you need to make sure you understand when you allow this to happen, what does it mean and who has access to it? Which brings us to one of the most important pieces about security is the things I can't prevent, I at least need to know what are going on. And that comes into auditing and logging. So our auditing and logging capability are really important within Power BI. So we're talking about auditing Power BI, there's a couple places we can do this. We do this at the dashboard or the workspace levels by looking at the usage metrics. I believe I have one of those up. So if we're looking at usage metrics, like this dashboard usage metric, it'll talk to me about who did stuff during the day, how many views by users down in the corner here. Let's go ahead and zoom this in a little bit. Oops, wrong one. So we can actually see, well, it's resizing for me, which is helpful. But down here we got views by users. So we can actually go and look and say, here's all the people who looked at it, here's they viewed. And I can at least know who's looking at like my dashboard or my report. So that's definitely one of the areas that you can use. It's available on the dashboards and it's available on the reports themselves from a usage metric standpoint. So like I said, if you go back, you can see any number of things, who's viewing it. Believe that it's basically, and here's your shares, which I don't have any shares in mine, but it'll actually tell you how many times it's been shared that day. So you can actually look and see what's going on with your data. All these are important features to be aware of as you're trying to track down. Now, I would say that this type of usage metric is really focused to the workspace and the workspace owner. This is not really a full administrative capability. That feature comes out when we actually look at the next thing, which is the audit logs in Office 365. There are currently 91 Power BI activities individually logged in Office 365, and that count will continue to grow as more features are added. So some of the things to be aware of that are actually there. I viewed a report. I viewed a dashboard. I've shared it. I shared it with who? I've updated something. You have all this stuff is being tracked in Office 365 audit logs. Now, what I will caution you on is those audit logs typically are not available to you. It's not available to Power BI admins directly in most cases. A lot of that is handled by the Office 365 team and the admins there. So as we move forward on that, here's some of the sample content you can use. You can see it's here, and you can actually create your own audit log solution if that's something you want to do. I actually have a link out here on my site at datawells.com. If you go search for audit logs, you'll find it. This solution was created by Steve Howard. I give him full credit. He actually created the basics as a Power BI shell. Be aware, because of the changing nature of Power BI, this is a starting point for you. You may have to create your own views and such like that. If this is something that you feel is a bridge too far for you, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but we have a managed service offering that really is about the same thing, where we go in and our goal is to help do this work for you. We have a whole suite of dashboards created to help manage your environment for this reason, because it's not easy to keep track of everything that's going on in your environment. Report usage, we just looked at this report, but this gives you an idea of some of the stuff that you can see. Content creators are really the target of report usage, so they can see if the report's being used, not used. If it's not being used, you can delete the report. Those are some of the things you might actually look at. Getting near the end here, couple other areas that I want to talk about before I wrap up. Data classification. Data classification is labeling, not security. It requires process and rules, but it's not a security, so there's nothing that prevents me from doing anything on there. You can see it just basically puts a tag on the report or on the dashboard. It doesn't even work on reports. So you're able to tag a dashboard and you can see it and say, hey, this has high business value or is confidential, however you tag it, but you have to create the processes. So just be aware that you can set it up in tenant settings so we can actually use it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't secure your data. It's a process and compliance thing, not a security item. We're not going to dig into this real deep. A lot of this is still, some of this is still preview, some of this is getting better, but you need to be aware that data flows are changing how your data is being stored. Because we're focused on this, I'm planning to try to dig into this a little bit more and get a better understanding from our team about this, but you're welcome to reach out and talk and ask some questions. If you're interested in using data flows, one thing to be aware of is Power BI storage is being used, which is a part of Azure Data Lake Store. And you need to be, the data is loaded there, so it's easy to create content. There's some nuances. Data flows are owned by one owner, the creator of the content. And that content access to that content currently is limited to the workspaces there. However, things are changing. We're seeing Azure Data Lake Store integration being used more. You store the flows in your own data lake, means other people can access it. So now this data is being generated by Power BI may have other access points to it. So I would really, this is a really cool feature that's coming. It's also something that you need to make sure you understand how your data is secured in that scenario and how you can access that data within Power BI, and if you end up using your own data lake store outside of Power BI. So just be aware that's kind of where that lands. Running at the end here, so our wrap up, Power BI does a really good job of managing data security. It keeps improving. The new workspaces, for instance, were added in 2019. A lot of times the biggest issues with Power BI are the fact that it's cloud-based and your security policies and procedures, your rules, all that stuff are internal. Sometimes it's in politics related. We don't trust the cloud, so we don't trust Power BI. That's something we see often in our line of work, both with Power BI and Azure. It's happening less and less. The other problem is that we have certain security policies in place, and this is how we handle things, and those things can't be as easily handled in some cloud applications. And that becomes an area where you actually have to, as an organization, make decisions on how you change and how you go into audit and be in compliance. So those are things that are still to come. Still doesn't have a read-only license. Rumors are rumors. Maybe we'll see one at some point. But at the end of the day, without, some of the stuff that makes this difficult is a low-end read-only license that allows for, frankly, for the smaller businesses to do read-only work and secure their data without having to go to premium to see the same benefits. Here's some resources. I do have a full series of blogs on my site, or a series of blogs on my site around Power BI data security. I will be looking to expand that content, hopefully over the next few weeks with some of the stuff around data flows and the new workspaces. Be aware that the content I actually have content on that's older than that because it changes so often. So be mindful with me and anyone else who writes on something like Power BI, where it's a constant changing platform, to review it and make sure you check the age of that content that it hasn't changed already. Microsoft Trust Center is listed. A little bit more about Pragmatic Works. We do a lot of Power BI work, and we really see that Power BI work funnel into three offerings that we have, and then we'll take some questions. I'll talk about these real quickly here. Power BI Managed Services, really a lot of stuff that I've talked about is not easy to track down. We have a managed service offering that actually goes and encapsulates the work around this and basically does things like manage access to your workspaces, workspace design. We can actually do some, do a lot more than just security in Power BI Managed Services. So reach out to us, ask the question. If you're interested in taking the burden of managing Power BI day to day off of your teams, we can help with that. We also provide consulting services, including things like an enterprise readiness package that basically comes in and walks through a lot of what I do in security, as well as other things around governance, best practices, all these type of things we bring to you. The goal there is to help launch your Power BI operation successfully, or look at what you have and evaluate it. We've been doing, like I said, we're doing this a long time for a lot of different industries. We understand the complexity of the work that's involved. And like you're doing today, participating in some free training, we actually have a lot of trainings. Our Power BI training courses are top of the line. The training team puts together and updates as frequently as they're able to. It's some awesome stuff in that line. So, all right, we have about a little bit over 10 minutes. So, Crystal, I bet there's some questions out there for me. If you want to just let me in on what everybody's asking.
Yeah, not a problem. Let me go ahead and pull them up here and see what we got going on. There are quite a bit of questions. The first question is from Marcel. Are you going to be touching on the on-prem Power BI server or cloud only?
Well, I think I covered at the beginning. This is cloud only. Power BI on-prem, that security model is really related to reporting services more than Power BI.
Okay, the next question is from Jordan. It says, does RLS work in apps?
Yes, it does. It's actually one of the best use cases for it. So if you implement it so if you follow either of the patterns and you actually implement row-level security, it will be honored in apps because it's going to transmit your credentials across and it'll be honored. So.
All right, the next question is from Jenna. Jenna says, if you created workspaces that created a matching O365 group, old, can you now delete those groups to reduce confusion in the tenant? If you have old workspaces, do you have to delete and recreate to have them act as the new workspaces?
To my knowledge, there's no migration. I haven't seen it yet. So that would mean that what you said was a hard way, right? If you want to actually do this on new workspaces, eliminate the Office 365 group confusion, you're going to have to create a new workspace and redeploy your assets to that. The biggest issue there, keep in mind, the biggest issue you're going to have with that is the fact that dashboards are not easy to move. So if you have some questions around that, it would be a good idea to reach out. We should be able to provide some guidance on how to move that forward.
All right, Justin had a few, I'm thinking just like a quick little question here. It says, isn't the third role actually called member? I don't see a reader role.
Oh, you know what? I think that's a typo on my part. They changed the name on that. So you're right, it is member, I believe. And we can confirm that by, I think it's this one here. Oh. Keep going, go ahead, that's the next question. I'll get to my security here as soon as I get to the right place. I gotta grab a new workspace. There we go. It is member. My apologies for putting the wrong word on there. So, but it's the equivalent of reader permissions, and I think that's where they changed the names around a little bit. So.
All right, awesome. Okay, the next one's from Ed. Are there any instances where the audit log should be turned off? Prior to the cloud, audit logs would generally result in using much server usage with different BI tools.
The audit log is on by default inside of Office 365. Well, actually, that's only partially true. You can actually turn on full audit logging. I'd recommend turning on audit logging, then moving the audit logs to blob storage on a regular basis through a PowerShell script, so you retain them for cheap. It's the only way you can really look at everything that's going on in your environment. So if this security is a concern, you should turn audit logs on.
All right, awesome. Okay, the next one's from, for the pronounce around Fatea, but it says how can we be certified admin in DV Power BI? How can we get certified?
I don't know if they have certification on Power BI admin. There's a Power BI certification, but in order to be an admin within Power BI, you actually have to request it from your Office 365 admin or your Azure Active Directory admin internally.
Okay, next question from Justin. Does the usage matrix page display usage for reports viewed in apps or just workspaces?
It's workspace based, but if it's viewed in an app, it's considered a view of that report. So it covers both.
Okay, Sean says, can you have more than one set of report apps per workspace?
No, it's still one-to-one. It's actually a request. If you want to vote that up out on Power BI's suggestion list, I would encourage you to do so. But currently, it's still one-to-one.
Oh, next one from Inga. Can Windows authentication users' own credentials used for SSAS live connection using gateway accessing DBs on-prem if the Kerberos is set up?
So Kerberos, that's a very complicated question. There's a lot of pieces to that. The way it works right now is Azure Active Directory credentials are sent, and they're really sent in a non-Kerberos fashion. However, if Analysis Services is actually integrating behind the scenes to something using Kerberos, it should be able to leverage that. The big thing to be aware of is that because it's Azure Active Directory, the format of the email address or the format of the username is different than the format used by Active Directory. So it will actually send the credential across in a like steve@dataonwheels.com format as opposed to dataonwheels/steve. And because of that, it creates some issues as people try to migrate or use Power BI with their existing patterns with on-prem sources. So I wish I had a better answer for that. It's something that definitely has to be worked through, and you have to. There's ways to help with that, but at the moment, there's no clean answer to that question. I don't believe that Kerberos is not in play when it comes to cloud services, so that's part of the problem.
All right, the next question is there a built-in automated, I'm thinking this is MEAS, MEAS, to sync users for row-level security? If we have a table of emails and a role they should have access to, or the best practice to create and add groups and add members to that?
I think there's probably some more details to that question before I can answer it outright.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be one to follow up with us again. I'll need to know more about your scenario.
So Sean asked, do they all go into one app, one app?
What all goes into one app?
That's all it says. It just says they all go into one app. So I'm not sure. It said the next question is from, can you provide a link to pull logs via PowerShell?
Actually, that link is provided. You can actually go find it on my blog post, dataonwheels.com. Search for. You can look at the Power BI data security. There'll be a link for all the Power BI desktop file, the PowerShell scripts and such will all be available. I share those from like I said, from the Microsoft guy. So let me Let's see here.
Okay, the last question is from Justin again. It says, is there a way to export dashboard report refresh history? Is there a shell query we could run to ePort and store historical data? Currently, we can only view 30 days of refresh history.
Yeah, and that's true of most of the logging. You only have like 30 to 90 days of that logging information available. That's one of the reasons I recommend that you actually PowerShell that out and push it to like blob storage for permanent storage so you can actually use it later. Refresh history directly, to have to look and see if it's one of the items on the list for auditing. But yeah, if it's there, you're going to want to push it out to some other place so you can continue to report on it.
All right, that's the last one.
Look at that. So I left my resources up. My blog post, like I said, will have information on the audit logging and PowerShell scripts. But you can always reach out to us at primaryworks.com, of course, for anything else. So I'm going to hand it back to Crystal now.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for hosting the webinar. We appreciate it.
Glad to do it.
All right, as for everybody else, there will be a recording. I know some of you guys are asking about the slides. I will check into that to get in the slides if we can do that. But all the recordings are now on our YouTube page, so you guys can feel free to go on there anytime and look up the recordings there. But also you guys will receive the link in your email tomorrow. So if you guys have any questions before that or even after that, please feel free to reach out to myself or reach out to Steve if you guys need to. Thanks so much for joining, and we really appreciate it. You guys have a great day.